Imagine slipping into a perfectly fitting, beautiful, handmade pair of socks that you have made from scratch. Hello, my name is Jeanette. I am the designer behind Jeanette Knits, and welcome to an in-depth tutorial on how to make this pair of rhubarb and custard socks. It is a toe-up construction with a sole gusset and a honeycomb brioche heel flap finished with a tubular bind off. And I can tell you that in this case, it's not just about the finished object, it's also a really engaging knit because stranded color work keeps you hooked as you can see the pattern reveal itself as the sock grows. So it's really hard to put down and it's packed with a lot of interesting techniques. Whether you're a sock knitting pro or just started getting into socks, this video will be a step-by-step guide through the whole process, demoing in detail every technique that's used and helping you master all the necessary skills. If you'd like to knit along with me, you'll need a sock yarn in 2 different colors and needles suitable for that yarn, and most importantly you'll need the pattern. You can download the pattern on Ravelry, searching for Rhubarb and Custard Socks, or follow the link in the description. You can also download it from our website. I'm assuming you already know how to make a gauge swatch and how to adjust your needle size to match the gauge that's needed in the pattern, which is 32 stitches by 38 rows in a 10 by 10 centimeter or 4 by 4 inch square. Done in Colourwork stockinette after blocking, worked in the round, of course. In this tutorial, we'll cover everything from the closed cast on that you'll need for the toe, how to work the toe increases using lifted increases. I'll give you some quick color work tips for tension, how to figure out where to start the gusset, how to make the gusset increases, how to shape the heel using Japanese short rows, and how to work this very intriguing looking honeycomb brioche heel flap, and finally finishing it off with a 1x1 twisted rib and a tubular bind off. I've included chapters in the description below, so please feel free to skip sections if I'm covering something that you already know, as it is a rather long video. So let's take a closer look. There are multiple closed cast-on that can be used for these socks, but I will demo the one that I've described in the pattern, Judy's Magic Cast-On. And for that you will need circular needles with quite a long cable and the yarn, of course. You can start by creating a slip knot and placing it on one of the needles like so, or you can simply put some yarn through both of them. So place the needles next to each other, leave some tail, and hold the yarn as if you would for a long tail cast on. And remember this mantra that to get a loop on one of the needles, you have to move the opposite. So to get a loop on the bottom needle, I'll have to move the opposite finger around the bottom here and through the top back in there. It should look like that. Now I need to get a loop on the top needle, so I move the opposite finger, so that's the thumb, around the bottom and wrap it around the top needle so that the yarn goes through the middle of the both needles. Now I need a loop on the bottom needle, so I'll take my top finger, which is the index finger, around the bottom through the middle, and around the bottom through the middle, around the bottom through the middle, until I have the required stitch count. In the pattern it says you should have 12 stitches on each needle, a total of 24. So here's a few more attempts. You can get quite quick when you wrap your head around it. So opposite finger around the bottom and through the middle. And then we'll look at how to knit the first round once I've got all the required stitches. Now that I've got all my stitches, and I want to knit the first round, I have to remember to twist, because they're very loose and fragile here. I have to twist the stitches around so that I end up with the strand that's attached to the ball. I have made many mistakes by continuing working with the shorter tail and then having to redo work. So make sure you grab the strand that's attached to the yarn ball or yarn cake and turn it around like so, so you can work across these stitches and pull out the bottom needle, leaving all the stitches there on the cable. And we just simply knit across needle 1, or making sure we don't lose any of the loops. Twist it one more time if required. And we do the same on the other needle. So I'm pulling the cable to transfer all the stitches on the actual needle, and here I'll pull it out. So that this is why you need a circular needle with a long cable. So you could do this figure of 8, and it would stretch far enough to allow you to work without constraining yourself. And there is a little trick for the second needle. Once you knit through the first stitch, you gotta check how your stitches are mounted. You'll see that the first leg is actually at the back of the needle, which means that to get the stitches lying properly, you'll have to knit through the back loop across this needle. That's just because they ended up mounted the other way. If you knit through the front loop, you'll end up with twisted stitches and it won't look so neat, but also not a big deal. This is your first time. It will also be much easier to work this needle through the back loop. And voila, we have worked the first round. This is where we would place the beginning of round marker, but because there's so few stitches, and we can clearly see that the cast on tail is hanging on this side. While we do the toe increases, I'll be remaining on the circular needles and working one needle at a time, and it's easy to spot the beginning of round because of this tail, so I won't be bothering with any markers just yet. Well, feel free to place a locking stitch marker in the work if that's easier for you. After the cast on, I'm ready to start my toe increases. This is my first round of toe increases, and this is a very symmetrical trapezoid shape, so whatever we do on the first needle, we'll simply have to repeat on the second needle until we have the required number of stitches. And once again, you can use whatever increase method you like, as long as one of them is right leaning. So the first one should be right leaning and the second one should be left leaning. My preferred ones for this project are the lifted increases. So we knit one stitch and we do a right leaning lifted increase. That's using the stitch from row before and knitting into it again. You can, if you're able to insert your tip from here like so, you can simply knit through it without needing to put that stitch on the needle. But if you like to, but alternatively you can also lift it, because it's much easier to insert the needle from back to front. And then you kind of have to use your thumb to hold the existing stitches back so that this new loop that you've picked up doesn't overlap, and knit through the front loop like that. So that was my right leaning increase, and I have to knit to one stitch before the end of this needle, at which point I'll be making my left leaning increase. And the left leaning increase is using a stitch from below, but on the opposite side. So from the stitches I just worked, this is what I worked, this was this row, so I have to go kind of the third strand, and again I place it on the needle, hold the existing stitch back and knit through it again. And that is my increase round, or the first half of the increase round done. I'll repeat exactly the same on the second needle, and then I'll knit one round without any increases, and I'll be swapping between an increase round and simple knit round until I have reached the desired stitch count for my foot circumference. I'm almost done with the toe increases, just got one more plain round, and I'm using that round to move from circular needles to DPNs. I find a lot easier to work small circumferences on DPNs than circular needles, because I find that I waste a lot of time sliding stitches along the cable when I use circular needles. So wooden light DPNs for me work really well. They're not as slippery as metal ones, and they're lighter, so they stay in the knitting. And yeah, I don't do any sliding of stitches. Oh, and another thing, it's probably a good time to add that beginning of round marker here. If you're using circular needles, then you can add the marker on the needles and make sure that, as there's no risk that it would fall off, but as I'm using DPNs, I can't really place the marker at the end of this needle, it would keep falling off. So I'm placing it in the work, and I will just continue moving it up as the sock gets longer. So I need 16 stitches per DPN for my size. It's 4 more stitches, and that goes on the last DPN, and I'll be back to join the contrast color and start the color work. And this is my first color work round. I have chosen a very subtle contrast because I like the mild look of the sock that will produce. I hope it's going to turn out the way I want it to, and I don't know why I just did that, but you'll see later. So the chart is the same for all sizes, but depending on which size you work, you would need to start with a different starting stitch of the pattern repeat, of the chart repeat. So if your size says start with the stitch number 7, then you look at the chart, it's got 8 stitches, 8 stitch columns. You start with the 7th, then work the 8th, and then restart from 1 to 8 again and go around. And you should end with the 6th so that there is a seamless join here. And that is to do with the gusset placement later, so that for all sizes it aligns with the same middle of the same stitch and produces the same look. I happen to be working size 2, which means my first stitch is actually the first stitch, so there's nothing tricky about that. I need to do 2 main color stitches before joining my contrast color. And now you'll see why I did that little slip knot. I like to join a new colors or new yarns with a little slip knot. That really puts it stably in the place. Stably, is that a word? That stabilizes it in place, and it's not moving around or stretching the first stitch out too much. So I'm going to work 3 stitches in the contrast color, and then go back to my main color and work 5 stitches in main color. I've already started the second repeat of the chart. Obviously that's now created an extra stitch which I do not need, and I will have to remember that when I encounter this bump on the next round, I can just simply slip it off the needle, and it will create a little knot at the back as well to keep this tail in place. And you can see that the first stitch, the first actual contrast color stitch, is the same size as all the others. That makes it knitting the first row of a new color a lot easier. And I will, after having done the first round, I'll move on to the second row of the chart again, starting with the same stitch that was specified in the pattern for your size. So if it's the 7th, always start with the 7th all the way to where the gusset should begin. And we'll talk about how to determine that in a short while. And a couple of helpful standard color work tips that could get you nice and even tension. First of all, whenever you change colors, make sure you stretch out the stitches that you have just worked. And do that on every color change. So I'm about to change color. I have to stretch out these stitches before picking up that. And that will keep the float at the back nice and loose. And second tip will help you keep the wrong side nice and tidy and keep your yarns from getting tangled and your color work to pop more. And just make sure that whenever you pick up to work with the contrast color, that is for me the darker color, pick it up from the bottom, like so. You could pick the strand either over the top of the current working yarn or from the bottom. So if you're picking up contrast color, pick it up from the bottom so that the yarn is situated closer to the origin of the stitch, and that way it's pushed out a bit more so it pops on the background color. And that means that whenever you're about to work with the background color or the main color, in my case it's the white one, pick it over the top of the current working strand. And that will get each color will have its own path along the line. The main color will be always on the top and the contrast color always on the bottom, so they will never get tangled. And it will also make sure that the contrast color pops out. Just remember that if you all of a sudden swap the directions and you start picking up the main color from the bottom, that will then be the popping color, and the contrast color will sort of recede into the work and it won't be as visible. It could look like an entirely different pattern. And if you're somebody who works with 2 yarns in each hand, so then make sure that you leave the main color on the right side and the contrast color on the left side, and that way it will automatically be picked up from the bottom while you throw over the top. A good question you'll have while you're working on the instep here is where you need to start the gusset. In the pattern I've already given some numbers that you can follow if your foot length matches the foot length in the pattern for that size. But if your foot is longer or shorter, I've also given you the length of this area here so that you can adjust by taking that away from your total foot length. Now, in case your row gauge is different, because that can sometimes happen, your stitch gauge matches and your row gauge is different, then you might need to do some calculations to find the perfect spot for your gusset. For that, I have a blog article on my website going into detail on how to do those calculations, but just quickly here to cover the basics. It assumes that the whole of the foot length is divided in 3 sections. Section A being the point from the toe to where the gusset starts. Section B being the length that it will take to complete all the gusset increases. And section C simplistically assumes the width of half of the heel flap. And if you know your row gauge and your stitch gauge, you can go through the pattern and figure out how many rounds you need to work the gusset increases. That will give you the rounds for this section, which you can then convert into centimeters or inches using your row gauge. And you have also the number of stitches for your heel flap, and given the stitch gauge, taking half of the heel flap, you can figure out the width of this section here. And that, summing up this part and that part, will give you the total length that you should that will be remaining from where you start the gusset. So you can simply take the total length of the foot, remove or subtract the two pieces of length that you just figured out, and the remaining part will be the length you need to achieve from the toe to where you need to start the gusset. But please feel free to consult the blog article on ZanetteKnits.com for further detail on this. To set up the gusset, I've already worked from the beginning of round all the way to where my gusset will start, and I am to place a marker here and knit one stitch in the main color, and then I'm to use the contrast color and do a left leaning lifted increase. So I pick up a stitch from the row below and put it on my left needle and knit through it. Then I pick up the main color again and knit one more stitch, and then pick up the contrast color and make a right leaning lifted increase. So I pick up a stitch from the row below and knit into it, and then I'm to take the main color again and knit one stitch and place a marker. So that is the first setup round, and I will continue to the beginning of round, starting with the second stitch of the chart. And that means that for every size, the middle of the gusset here should align with the first stitch of the chart. And this row is also the one that sets up the whole gusset. We'll continue always knitting the first and last stitches in main color, but as we add more stitches every other round, we'll be starting them so that the gusset is a striped pattern. So the next stitch I increase will be in main color and on both sides symmetrically. But on the sides of the gusset, we continue moving up the chart. I can't tell you which chart row you're supposed to do because that depends on how long your sock is, but it will be the same row you worked before the gusset. I will demonstrate the increases one more time on the next round. So I'm going to do a plain round without increases, and then another round with increases until I reach the required stitch count, and the pattern says how many stitches you should have between the markers here. One more time, the demo of the gusset increases. So after the marker, the first stitch is always knit in main color, and then when it's time to increase, we look at what's the next one to work. So in here I've got the contrast color. That means I will have to increase in the main color again. So left leaning increase like that. Hard to see behind the needle, try and hide it. So pick up a stitch from the previous row and knit through that, and then we carry on as established. So I can see a contrast color stitch and then a main color stitch. And now again, contrast color stitch, and I've come to one stitch before the other side of the gusset, and I need to do my increase on the next color, which in this case is the same as before. I better put it on the needle here. So knitting through that loop, and the last gusset stitch will always be in main color. of doing the first short row to shape the heel, to add a little half moon because our heel is round. And it says to knit to the Gusset marker A, which is the first marker here, slip the marker, and then continue knitting with the main color to 2 stitches before the next Gusset marker, and continuing to trap the contrast color, as we'll need to bring it all the way to the other side here. So after every 5 or so stitches, I'm just twisting the yarns behind on the other side of the work, so that the contrast color gets trapped and I can drag it all the way across the gusset. And I am almost there. This part is a bit fiddly. So it's set to knit to 2 stitches before the marker. I'm going to do my last catching of the float. And then I have to make an increase, a right leaning lifted increase. So here I'll just pick it up like that and knit through. And then knit 1 more stitch and do the short row turn. So I like to use Japanese short rows, but you can do whatever short row method you prefer, of course. And for Japanese short rows, we need to trap the yarn, secure the yarn before turning or after turning, doesn't really matter. But we will be using this little loop to conceal the turn when we work over it on the consecutive rows. And on the wrong side of the short row, we do the same. In Japanese short rows, I like to slip the first stitch to create a smoother step, but that's entirely optional. So I've slipped 1 and I will be purling to 2 stitches before that next marker. This time I don't need to catch the floats anymore because I can leave this contrast color hanging here. I'll be continuing it with it from there. My yarn's gotten real tangled now. Just quickly untangle them. And actually, because you'll be working the heel flap, the rest of the short rows and the heel flap with the main color, I will tuck this contrast color inside the sock so it doesn't get in the way. Again, do 2 stitches before the next marker. It is definitely one of the fiddliest parts, because especially if you're working with DPNs, because I'm not sure how it is for you, but when I am purling, I get these needles stabbing me in the palms, and I have to yet to find a great way, but we'll get through it. It's not too much. So 2 stitches before the next marker, and I need to do a right leaning purl increase. So instead of creating a knit stitch, I'll be creating a purl stitch, but the concept's the same, placing it on the needle and purling through it again. And I purl 1 more before once again trapping the yarn. If you're using Japanese short rows, and turning. Let the bobby pins dangle on the other side. So the next short row we do is work to 4 stitches before the previous turn. So in this short row we'll have to identify where we turned, and for Japanese short rows it's very easy to do So I just pulled this bobby pin here, and I can see that I must have turned right after this stitch, because that's the first one I worked after slipping. So I'll have to work all the way to here before doing my next increase and then turning again. One, two, three, four. So one more. And one more right leaning lifted increase. One more knit stitch, and I'm going to secure the yarn and do the same on the other side. So purl after turning and securing the yarn, purl to 4 stitches before the previous turn. Easy to tell with Japanese short rows. When I pull the bobby pin, it immediately shows me what the last 2 stitches are. So 2 more all the way to here. And after that, we just repeat the last set of short rows 2 more times. So you'll end up with 4 little, if you're doing Japanese short rows, you'll end up with 4 bobby pins or locking stitch markers on each side. And I'll come back when I'm there to show you how we conceal the gaps. So here we are, probably one of the trickiest rounds in the whole sock. I have just finished my last turn on the wrong side. I have trapped the yarn and knit 1 stitch, and it says to now knit all the way to 2 stitches before this marker here, at the same time closing all the short row gaps. So I have 4 turns here, so 4 potential gaps that I need to close, and let's get doing that. It will of course depend on your short row method. So this is for those who are doing Japanese short rows. I work to the turn, use the bobby pin loop, place it on the needle and knit 2 together with the next stitch, and I'll do that for all of these. And here I am, 2 stitches before. That's okay, there's 1 more short row to close, but we can do that in a minute. And I have to place a new marker here. This will be important for the heel flap. And knit 2 more stitches, and obviously because there is another gap, I should close it at the same time. Those are my 2 stitches, and it says to remove the previous marker so it doesn't mess with our heads. And then it says to pick up the contrast color, which should be just right here. I was wrong, I do need it for a little bit. And to, with both colors, work the same chart row that we did just before starting the short rows, which you should have noted after the last round of the gusset increases. And with the second stitch of the pattern repeat, that will be, no, that's main color for me. It will be individual because it depends on where you started the gusset, which side you're working, etc. I am at the beginning of round now, and the next step is to work across these stitches with both colors when we get here. So it will, the stitch count is specified in the pattern and it depends on the size. Then we will cut the contrast color and continue back and forth across the heel flap in just the main color. We'll also be working this little section here in the main color, and that will be different from what we just done here, but that's okay because while we're working on the heel flap, we will be working these stitches together with this side that will grow of the heel flap, so you won't actually see this row, the next row here. It doesn't matter what color yarn we use. And I'll come back once I'm here to set up the heel flap. So I have worked across the top of the sock to where I needed to cut the contrast color. I've cut it, and I'm going to continue across the rest of the foot and gusset, and we will be removing this marker, replacing it 2 stitches later, and closing all these short row gaps on our way. So as I said, we'll continue with just the main color, and the first part is easy, getting to the marker. Now I will no longer need it here. I'll need it 2 stitches later, but because I have a short row turn there, I need to conceal the gap. And because I'm approaching from the other direction, the concealing of the gap in this case is a little different. I have to stop 1 stitch before the turn. Here's where the turn was. Slip it as if to knit, because we'll be doing kind of an SSK on this. And theoretically, I should be placing this loop on here on this needle, because it's really tight and really hard to do. We'll do an alternative way, so I'll just knit through it and then pass the slip stitch over, so it has the same effect as an SSK. I'll knit 1 more stitch before replacing the marker for the heel flap, and I can actually remove this, and I will continue across to the next marker, closing all the other short row gaps. Again, slip as if to knit, knit through this loop, pass the slipped stitch over and remove the bobby pin. Slip as if to knit, knit through the loop, pass the slip stitch over. Oh gosh, this is a splitty yarn, and I've got sharp needles. We've got 1 more to do. If you are doing Japanese short rows for the first time, this is the most complicated way to conceal the short row gap, but it also has the most seamless result in this instance, where you're approaching to return working back in the round, but it is kind of unintuitive where you need to stop before you start it. So just 1 stitch before the turn is here. Slip as if to knit, knit through this little loop, and pass the slip stitch over. And we might need to tug on this working yarn a little bit to really keep it all tight, and avoid any holes forming or the stitches stretching, but it should look something like. Now these little holes here are from the lifted increases. It's got nothing to do with the short rows. So I'm working all the way to the second marker. Slipping the marker and doing my first SSK. So this will make the heel flap that I will be working back and forth, and I will be decreasing these stitches along the side here until we have returned back to the original stitch count, and we can return back to work the leg in the round. And here we are going to set up the honeycomb brioche for the heel flap on the wrong side. We start by slipping the first stitch and slipping the marker with the yarn in front. It's what we'll always do. And then the rest of the instruction depends on your size. You might need to start with purling one and then purling two together. Just check the instructions, but basically we purl two together at some point. And then slip one with yarn over. That's the brioche part. Again, purl two together, slip one with yarn over, purl two together, slip one with yarn over, etc., etc. So the slip one with yarn over is basically I'm doing a yarn over, bringing the yarn to the front and slipping, but it's easier to do it at the same time. So bring the yarn to front and slip it, and then the yarn ends up at the back. And I'm gonna do that all the way to the marker, and we'll see what we do next from there. Now, because the honeycomb brioche requires a certain stitch count, and for some of the sizes there's a stitch left over or a stitch missing, I have tried to adjust that by just adding a simple knit or purl stitch. It might be on both sides or it might be nowhere, but for my size it is here at the end. I had to purl one to get to the marker, and then when we slip marker on the right side we do an SSK to decrease the side stitches here. On the wrong side we'll simply purl two together, and it will have a symmetrical decrease line going across here the same way that it does here on this side. And now we are on the right side again, so we have to slip the first stitch with the yarn at the back this time, slip the marker, and we knit, well, my size to knit that stitch that was purled there. But as soon as you see a yarn over and a stitch under it, you have to kind of go under there and knit that one. And then slip the yarn over. Again, knit the stitch under the yarn over and slip the yarn over with yarn at the back. Again, knit that one that was purl two together, knit the stitch under the yarn over, slip the yarn over, knit, knit, slip, knit, knit, slip, knit, knit, slip, knit, knit, slip. And for my size, I have one stitch left over here that I knit. I slip the marker and again SSK to reduce the side stitches here. Now I'll turn around and I'll do the next row of brioche on the wrong side. But we always slip the first stitch and marker. And now I've got to slip one with yarn over. Will depend on your size what you do first here, just follow the instructions, but eventually you'll have to slip one with yarn over and brioche knit the next two. One of them should be that previously slipped yarn over. Again, slip one with yarn over and brioche knit. Doesn't matter that we are on the wrong side for this stitch pattern, we need to brioche knit. Slip one with yarn over, brioche knit, slip one with yarn over, brioche knit, all the way to the marker or just before the marker, depending on your size. And for me, I have to just purl the last stitch. And as usual, do a decrease after that marker. In this case, purl two together. Something's starting to form here. And row 5 of this heel flap. Again, starting with slipping the first stitch in the marker. Here I will have to knit 3, well that's just for my size, but I knit all the way up to the yarn over, which again I slip. Knit all the stitches to the yarn over, slip the yarn over. Finishing with a decrease and turning work again. And this time we'll be repeating the same as row 4, except we'll start with the Burke instead of the slip one with yarn over. Every other wrong side row the stitches will be swapped, which is what makes the V pattern. So I'm slipping the one without the yarn over with yarn over. Oh, did I just make a mistake? Supposed to brioche knit this and then slip with yarn over, brioche knit, slip with yarn over, brioche knit, slip with yarn over, brioche knit. And we can start to see the honeycomb pattern. And we'll be repeating the last 4 rows for the specified number of times. That's for your size in the pattern. And once I got there, I'll return and we'll continue. And now I have finished all of those heel flap rows and repeats. And I am on the last. I have just turned from wrong side to right side. I'm ready to do the last heel flap row with main color, slipping first stitch in the marker, and nothing really changes here. I'm knitting them as nothing changes here. I'm knitting the knit stitches and slipping the yarn over as before. But this is the last time we'll be doing that here. All the way to the marker. I will no longer need this marker here, so I can remove it. And I'm also doing my last decrease on this side. And we are at the beginning of the round, as my marker indicates. And I'm ready to go back working in the round. And for that I will need 2 colors and continue the Colourwork chart with your specified stitch. For me that is stitch number 1, as I'm working on size 2, and that means I need to begin with contrast color. So I'm rejoining it here as I did at the instep, and I will work 3 stitches in contrast color, and then 1 stitch in main color, all the way to just 2 stitches before the marker. So if you are working on circular needles, you won't have an issue here, but because I've got DPNs, I will need to make sure that both of these are on the same needle, as I will be doing the last decrease on this side there. But I'll show you what that looks like when I get there. And I'm here, that is 2 stitches before the marker A. And because I need to work 2 stitches together and then remove marker, I better get both of these stitches on the same needle. And I already know I won't need the marker, so I don't want it to be swinging around there. I'll just remove it now. And I have to figure out which color I need to use. And the pattern says use the next color in this row according to the chart. For me, that happens to be main color, but that will depend entirely on which chart row you're at and which size you're knitting. So just follow the chart as if you would simply knit the next stitch, and then work across the rest of the heel flap stitches as if they were normal stitches. So here we go. I need to work 3 stitches, simply knit the yarn over. 3 stitches in contrast color, 1 stitch in main color, and we are returning to the chart all over or across the full circumference of the sock here. And after this round, we should really check our stitch count. We should be back to the original stitch count for the whole of foot, for the entire foot circumference that we had before the gusset. And if that's not the case, then there is something off. It looks like I have made a mistake somewhere, because I'm ending up with an extra stitch. Yes, instead of working 3 contrast color stitches here. I worked just 2, but that's easy to fix. I won't bore you with that, but basically we should end here and be at the beginning of round, completing that last chart repeat to begin again with the stitch that was specified for your size. And then we just continue in the round, following the chart through the next chart rows and restarting from chart row 1 to our desired length of the leg. And when I've gotten there, I'll show you what it looks like to get the cuff started. So I think I've come to a length that I like to end the leg here to be an ankle sock, and I'm ready to start the ribbing for the cuff. And that means I'll be just working in the main color and I won't need the contrast color anymore. So I can break that off. And according to the pattern, we are to work in twisted rib. But of course, that's entirely up to you, how you do the cuff. You could do 1 by 1, work 2 by 2, or whatever other rib. Could be a good idea to add a simple round of simple knit round before starting the rib, because that will prevent any contrast color stitches being purled and then showing up as a bump in contrast color that can well, what am I saying? That can cause an effect or a look that is less tidy. So this is a workaround for that. And now that I've done my 1 round in main color, I can begin the rib, and I will start with a knit through the back loop and purl. And these are the 2 stitches that I will repeat all around, knitting through the back loop and purling. This kind of rib isn't as stretchy as the classical rib, but I prefer the look of this one because it looks a lot tidier and neater. The stitches are more compact, so to speak, and it just fits the look of this sock, in my opinion, a bit better, because there's also, it creates little V's, a line of V's, and I think they go very well with the V's that we see in the heel. And I will continue working the knit to the back loop, purl 1 for as many rounds as I need to get to my desired cuff length, and I'll come back and we'll start on the tubular bind off. I've got my cuff to the height that I am happy with, and I am ready to set up the tubular bind off. There are a couple of setup rounds before using a tapestry needle and doing the tubular bind off steps, and those are to basically create like a little tube at the top, because what tubular bind off really is a Kitchener stitch that is, or a grafting stitch that is assuming that all the knit stitches are creating the fabric on the outside, and all the purl stitches are creating a piece of fabric on the inside, and then they are joined at the top, and that creates a little tube, like a double knit tube. Just really like the look of it and the stretchiness of it, so that's why I like using it in toe-up socks whenever there's a 1 by 1 rib pattern. It's a little bit trickier to apply the tubular bind off for 2 by 2. We will only be working every 1 of 2 stitches, and we'll be slipping the other one in the first round, and in the second round we'll be slipping the ones that we worked and working the ones that we slipped, so that to create that little double knit row. And you can either go and knit them as you would and then slip with yarn in front, knit and slip in yarn in front. A little more advanced would be to instead knit the stitches through the back loop, as that's how we work the rest of the ribbing. So that's what I am going to do in this version for me. Knit the stitch through the back loop and then slip the next stitch, the purl stitch, with the yarn in front. Again, knit through the back loop, slip with yarn in front. And I need to do this all the way around. And when I get to the beginning of round, I'll come back and show you what we do next. Back at the start of the round, I've just worked all these knit stitches, and now it's turn to work the purl stitches. So this time I'll be slipping the knit stitches with the yarn in back, and then purling that stitch that I slipped in previous round. Again, slipping with the yarn in back, purling, slipping with the yarn in back, and purling, and again. I have to do that all the way around, and that's when we can start the tubular bind off. To do the tubular bind off, we will need a tapestry needle, and we will need the yarn, the tail, to be something around 3 times longer than the length we need to bind off. So here's 1, 2, and 3. And we begin by, of course, threading the yarn through the tapestry needle. Because this is worked in the round, I'm going to do an extra step at the start that I don't typically describe in the pattern, but that's just something I do to keep it nice and joined in the round. So for the first stitch, I will go in purlwise without slipping anything off the needle, and I will go through the second stitch knitwise. So I need to get in here to be able to do it knitwise. And again, these two are just to set it up. And then we begin a cycle of steps, a set of steps that will just be repeating all the way around. And I'll demonstrate the first step. So the first step starts with a knit stitch, and we go into the knit stitch knitwise, at the same time slipping it off the needle. We find the next knit stitch, which is the third stitch, and we go into that purlwise, and that's when we pull the yarn. We shouldn't pull too tight, but we also shouldn't leave it too loose. It should relatively look the same. The leg that forms here should look the same length as the rest of the legs of the stitches. So that was step 1. We went into knit stitch knitwise and the other knit stitch purlwise. Now we have to deal with the purl stitch that is here on the needle. Should look like a purl stitch. And we go in the purl stitch purlwise, slip it off, find the next purl stitch, that will be now this stitch here behind the knit stitch, and go in it knitwise, and then we pull the yarn. Always start the first step on, well, it depends on how you work the ribbing and where you are, but if you're facing the knit stitch first, go in knitwise, slip it off, and purlwise. And if you're facing a purl stitch first, go in purlwise, slip it off, and then the knitwise, like so. Try and move it closer to the camera, because this is a tiny gauge. So knitwise, slip off, purlwise and purlwise, slip it off, find that second stitch and go in it knitwise, leaving on the needle. And we do that all the way around. We're creating a little nice round stretchy edge. If you have the legs of these top stitches all over the place, it might be that you're either leaving it too loose and you need to tug a bit more, or you're pulling too hard and it's pushing other legs out of place. So it's a fine balance to find, but with a lot of practice, I am confident you can find the tension that will look nice and polished. And here's a quick tip for those working on double pointed needles. So when you get to the last 2 stitches of the one needle, you can't really execute the steps fully. So I suggest, and that's what I like to do, is just transferring both of them to be the first 2 stitches of the next needle, and then you can carry on as before. Once I've moved all the way around, I'll come back and show you how to join in the round, and we'll have a finished sock. I've reached the last 2 stitches on my last needle, and I would typically just get rid of them by slipping off knitwise and then purlwise, but because I wanted to join seamlessly as possible to be in the round, what I typically do is I re-pick up the stitches that I already slipped off. So in this case, I need to pick up again that one knit stitch and this one purl stitch here, and then I can do the 2 steps one last time. It's tricky that. And simply pull out the needle, and you can see that it's pretty seamless here in the round. And one of my most favorite things about the tubular bind off is I can go ahead and weave in the end right away. I don't need to look for a tapestry needle or wait for that inspiration to weave in ends to come. I just do it here right away and I am done, and my sock looks really nice and polished. I hope this video was useful, and if you end up making a pair and sharing them on socials, please tag me because I cannot wait to see your creations. I'll see you in the next one.